Hello Year 9s, welcome to the third video in my Zero to Hero series, and I'd like to welcome you to this. We're going to start off by looking at storage, and in the next section we'll be looking briefly at calculations involved with file sizes. But in this section we're going to start off by looking at storage. Storage, remember, is one of the solutions to both of RAM's little problems. RAM's first problem is that it has limited size or limited capacity, and in order to get around this, many computer systems, in fact all modern computer systems, make use of something called virtual memory, where secondary storage is being used or pretends to be primary storage. This thus gives the system the illusion that it has more physical memory than it actually does have. The second issue that we need secondary storage for is that primary storage, you will recall, is volatile. Therefore, when the electricity is powered off, the contents are lost. So we need long-term storage, non-volatile storage that can save data programs for a long period of time. So within the von Neumann computer model, secondary storage is loaded into primary memory, and only then will the cache or the processor be able to get to it. There are three main types of secondary storage. There's magnetic storage, which includes things like floppy disks, hard disk drives, HDDs, and tapes. Optical storage includes things like CD-ROMs, DVDs, and Blu-ray. Solid state storage is storage where there are no moving parts. This is based on flash memory, and sorry about that. And so these are things like SSDs, solid state drives, SD cards, and USB pen sticks. Alright, we have this summarized using a more graphical version. So magnetic storage includes floppy disk drives, hard disk drives, tapes. Optical storage, as to reiterate, is CD, compact disc, DVD, digital, versatile disc, and Blu-ray. Solid state storage is the same as flash storage, includes things like SD, USB pen sticks, and SSD, solid state drives. You need to have a basic knowledge of how these technologies work. What you need to understand or be able to explain, literally in one sentence, is how on earth does each of these technologies represent data in binary format. In the case of magnetic storage, it is simply a case of the read-write head using electromagnetism picking up or writing polarity changes to a storage medium. So, in other words, picking up changes between north, south, and south to north poles. In optical storage, a laser, not normal light, a laser, it has to be a laser because it needs to be a very narrow longitudinal focused beam, is bounced through a prism, and then the reflected light is either dispersed by a pit or reflected, in which case the prism will totally internally reflected, and the light will be perceived through a light sensor as being either on or off. In the case of solid state drives, the technology used is something known as an FGMOS, a floating gate metal oxide semiconductor. We'll look at this a little bit more closely in a subsequent slide. How it effectively works is that electrons are either trapped or not trapped in the FG gate, in the floating gate. There are several characteristics that you need to understand the meaning of when talking about secondary storage. The first one is capacity, which means how much data can that particular device store. Speed means how fast can it access the data. How can you access the data? Portability, how easy is it to move that storage from one place to another. Durability, how well does it last? How robust is it? Does it take to being dropped, heat, all that sort of thing. Reliability, how consistently does it perform? If you move it from one place to another, does it continue to work? Is it unreliable? which is the opposite of reliable, and finally cost. How much does it cost? Not entirely on its own, but how much is the cost per kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte? Because that's the real money spinner. Is the cost per byte economical or is it not? So here's a diagram we've seen before when we discussed latency. I'd like to remind you, however, that it is in fact a triangle. So we've, to this point, particularly when we were speaking in terms of memory and the impact of secondary storage being used as virtual memory, and the impact of that about how much slower secondary storage is than primary storage. But there's another side to the triangle. There are two other sides. The other side is the cost. The cost per byte is extremely high the faster the technology, and the other side of the triangle is the base, and that is representing the capacity, the size, how much data can it store. And so we can see that hard disk drives and solid state drives, for that matter, despite being very slow, are in the region of 2 terabytes, but very inexpensive, very affordable in terms of their value for money, in terms of storage price per byte. So over the next few slides, we're going to have a detailed look at each of these characteristics for each of the storage types in turn, and then we'll try and put it all together in a concluding 2 slides. So we begin with magnetic storage. So magnetic storage, as a reminder, has a read-write head, and the bits are represented by a change of polarity from north to south or south to north. So each of these categories, I'm briefly going to drop an icon in here and we'll discuss why it is the case. Now, in terms of speed, in terms of magnetic storage, the hard disk drive wins hands down. Capacity, hard disk drives get in the region of terabytes. Individual tape drives do not amount to that much, but the bank, particularly if you have robotic arms, the overall capacity of that storage is extremely good. Portability, well, neither of these two are particularly portable. In terms of portability, unfortunately, the floppy disk wins. In terms of cost per megabyte, the hard drive wins hands down. Durability, tough one. Individual tapes have a rather limited lifespan themselves, but if the tapes are recycled and so on, it goes on very well. But in terms of an actual physical device, an individual device, I would say the hard drive wins. And in terms of reliability, it's not much in between the hard drive and the tape drives. The problem you have with tape drives is that they are really only suited for backup. They're not really designed as a live or online storage medium, whereas the hard drive is. Tapes are purely offline storage mainly, so they can do that very fast, very reliably for the amount of data that they are processing, but not as a main device within a system. Right, optical storage. Right, our 3 contenders are CD, DVD, and Blu-ray. How's it work? Laser light is bounced off a disc, which either reflects off the surface and the reflection is picked up through a reflecting prism, or it is deflected by a pit and that is not perceived and therefore seen as a zero. Right. In terms of speed, well, the Blu-ray disc wins, but it hasn't gained as much acceptance. So for that reason, DVD is actually still the king. Not because it's better, but because it has better, has more wide acceptance in terms of compatibility. So my award to speed, not for performance, but for compatibility, goes to the DVD. Capacity, similar arguments apply. Blu-ray can store up to 25 gig, but DVD is, most people don't have Blu-ray writers, they have DVD writers. Portability is an even match. They are all equally portable with each other. Cost, it's much of a muchness really. I think possibly as Blu-ray becomes more accepted as a technology, as storage technology, it will surpass DVD eventually as the main contender. So certainly in terms initial outlay, a bit more expensive, but I think long term it's going to be the one that comes out on top. Durability, DVD has a durability of around about 5 to 25 years, manufacturers reckon. Blu-ray on the other hand definitely wins out on top there, with the durability of the data being readable, but according to the manufacturers between 15 and 50 years in some cases. Reliability, not because it's a more reliable technology, but because it has wider acceptance. I'm going to award that to the DVD. Again, if you have a bit of storage and you've got data on a DVD, you're more likely to be able to go to another computer system and be able to access it there, and hence my award would go to DVD for portability as well. Right, on to solid state drives. Solid state drives work on using an FG floating gate MOSFET. It stands for metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor. And effectively what it is a MOSFET with an extra gate on it, and essentially what it does is there's a region which through principles of quantum mechanics, electrons are either trapped in this floating gate region it's called, or they are not. And then simply by passing an intermediate voltage between the source and the drain, if the voltage goes through, because they're not being impeded by the absence of electrons, that is registered as a 0 because there's an absence of electrons in the floating gate. Whereas if there are electrons in the floating gate, it creates a higher resistance and current doesn't flow, so one is therefore taken as being what is stored. Right, let's have a look at the speed, and just about in every single case the winner goes to the SSD, the solid state drive. Why, you may ask? Well, it uses a slightly better quality version of the NAND flash technology. It certainly kills everything else in terms of capacity. It is extremely portable. Cost wise, I'd say not cost per megabyte, but cost per device, I would give that to the USB stick. Actually close tie between those two. But in terms of compatibility, what can you use, what can't you use, you're more likely to be able to plug a USB stick into something than you will one of these SD cards. Durability, much of a muchness. In terms of these two guys, USB is definitely the worst because the end tends to break off. Solid state drives, far more reliable. In terms of reliability, really on the increase. There are issues with it, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So, the great HDD versus SSD debate. Right, as this bit of table data shows, the comparative price per gigabyte are difference between HDDs and SSDs in 2012 was quite significant, but that gap is closing all the time. The relative merits of hard disk to SSD, well, they both have weaknesses and strengths. The big weakness of the hard disk drive is that it's a mechanical device, and so it's far more susceptible to shock. It is shock resistant up to 360 Gs at 2 meters per second, whereas the SSD has a 1500 G resistance at 0.5 meters per second. if you drop these two, you're more likely that the solid state drive is going to be working at the end of it than the hard drive. Hard drives have dealt with bad sectors very reliably for many years because it's quite a mature technology. SSDs initially didn't do this very well, but they're starting to catch up, and they're using something called wear writing. Wear writing basically says if we took an SSD and we kept writing and rewriting, because the problem with the SSD and its weakness is in this floating gate MOSFET technology. See, one has to continuously write or clear the electrons in this floating gate, and eventually the barrier that separates the part of the device which is just a normal mass from the floating gate, that insulating layer breaks down and the gate no longer functions. Having said that, the gate is pretty reliable. It can retain electrons stored in the gate for up to 100 years, and we're talking around about 100,000 to a million rewrites before the gate fails. So initially this has been a problem because if you kept writing and rewriting the same blocks over and over again, just like a hard drive, you would eventually end up with bad blocks, which is equivalent to having a bad sector. And eventually, when enough of those fail, your disk will fail. So something called wear leveling has been introduced. So there are now in SSDs a processor or an algorithm where instead of writing all the blocks to the same place every time, the blocks are pretty much written at random locations. Now, because SSDs are directly addressable, where the blocks on the device are, it doesn't matter, and so therefore you should never defrag an SSD. If you defrag an SSD, you're going to be writing and rewriting cell blocks over and over again, and that certainly is going to shorten the lifespan of your device. So in conclusion, the winners for the best device in most cases would be the hard disk drive, but this is now being surpassed by the SSD in terms of capacity, portability, cost, durability and reliability. The SSD is on the way up, and I do believe that it's entirely likely that within the next not too long, a few years, hard disk drives might in fact, traditional magnetic hard disk drives might in fact actually be completely and utterly obsolete, because SSD has got its technology right, and that I think will be a very exciting era in computing. Thanks for watching. Mr. Holmes signing off.